We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil. Hey Anna, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing good, thank you. How are you?
I can see you've been busy on social media with your new women's safety initiative. For people who are unaware of what you're doing and what it is, it'd be great to get an understanding of it.
Yeah, of course. So I'm the deputy director of an organisation called the Women's Safety Initiative, and we are essentially a group of women that talk about the issues surrounding mass immigration into the UK and how that directly impacts women. So we also represent women who have, survived sexual crimes, other crimes in this country, and help them give them a platform to talk about their experiences and also being a network to bring women together as well. So we've just launched in April, and so far I believe we've raised over 4-5 thousand on our GoFundMe page. So we've
Wow.
had lots of support, and we've already got over 13,000 followers on X as well. And we recently just hosted our first smaller scale event in London, which was a success and just bringing people together. And we're looking at having a bigger launch party very soon. So it's become a really big success, lots of support behind us as well. And yeah, really excited with what's going to happen in the future with it.
Amazing. What sparked you to set this group up? What was the catalyst?
So Jess is the founder, and she came to me with the concept, and I was immediately supportive of it because I don't think an organisation like this exists in the UK. There is a similar one in France called Collective Nemesis, but we wanted to set up a UK specific one to represent women specifically and their voices, get their voices heard, and also hold people to account, hold those in power to account, and also be a body to raise awareness of these issues because I think especially with certain people, these issues do get skirted around. It's not always politically correct, but it is the facts. We focus on the statistics and we report on the truth and how that directly impacts women as well. So I think that's what inspired the organization to come to light. And then when we first announced it, we did not anticipate the amount of support that we would get. We knew that people would be behind this, but just the sheer scale of it, because I think for other women, they finally felt represented, and there was something there that could represent them, that they could actually get their voices heard. Overall, it's been a really big success, and yeah, really happy to be a part of it.
Amazing. What are some of the scary statistics that you've seen in relation to mass migration and women's sort of attacks and the attacks on safety?
So on our website, we've got a full breakdown on some specific cases where we've also go through the statistics that we've seen in this country specifically. Also, recently, just last week, we did another campaign in Westminster where we were stood there with our banners. We actually saw Richard Tice walk past us as well, and he gave us a thumbs up, which was quite nice. So what we do is we raise awareness on these specific issues, and as well, we get the public. They see some of the banners that we're holding, and we had mixed reactions. There was one woman who was cheering us on. There was another one who scowled at us. But I think I think with what we do, sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but it is the truth, and that's what we do. We're there to talk about these things, start conversations, and raise awareness.
I think it's amazing the work you're doing. I know for example, it'll be interesting if you've got any knowledge on this. I know like on Sweden, there was a massive increase on sexual violence towards women when they opened their borders crazy to refugees in 2016, 2017. Is that something similar that's happened in the UK that you're aware of that those numbers have just skyrocketed?
Yeah, I mean, personally, for myself and other women I know, almost all of them have very similar stories. Like for me, for example, a few years ago, I was walking home from work one night, and what I didn't realize is that I was being followed for several minutes. And it wasn't until I turned a corner and I was almost home when I felt someone grab me from in between my legs, and I screamed and turned around, and there was this man who was behind me, and he started speaking in a foreign language that I didn't understand, blowing kissy faces at me, and I had to run to get out of that situation. There's also other women that are part of the organization. They've got similar stories as well, where they've been catcalled, they've been harassed, they've been followed home. And I think for these women, especially, it's really scary. And they felt like they weren't being taken seriously. They felt like they were, when they've spoken about these stories, that they felt like they weren't being heard, which is why, again, what we exist to do is give them a platform to talk about those stories and not feel ashamed of that.
It's absolutely terrifying. Was this recent? Quite a while ago, recently?
So it was a few years ago that happened to me. I reported it to the police, and what then came out was that there were 5 or 6 other girls that he had targeted in the local area as well who had similar stories. And after about a 2-year process, he did eventually get deported, but it did take 2 years for that to happen.
So scary. It's
Mm.
whereabouts in England was this?
So it was in so it was in Medway area, so near Kent. Yeah.
It's scary
Mm.
because the reason I ask location, because often we hear obviously about Rotherham and places like that. We don't necessarily think of London or Kent or places like that where this can happen, but it seems like it's literally everywhere and anywhere in England at the moment. Is there like amongst your group they've all shared similar stories? Is it like quite clear to you guys that the dots have connected in terms of the large increase in mass migration has meant that because there are different values maybe towards women, that there is a serious threat towards women? Is that like the general group consensus for everyone?
Yeah, that is exactly what it is. And I think in terms of the government, the scale of immigration has just gone up on an exponential level. And I think when you're importing people from certain cultures that don't respect women at a high scale as well, you are going to see an increase of these crimes. You're going to see more women who are victims of these crimes, which is why this is happening. And I know for many women as well, they felt afraid to come forward because, in case they didn't feel, they'd be believed, or they were too ashamed. They felt scared. Especially even these. I know in London as well, we're seeing a lot more of these crimes. And there's with the women that I've spoken to and involved in the organisation, they even feel nervous walking around London in case of being victim of this crime. I mean, for me as well, I've had a couple of incidents where that's happened to me as well, where I felt uncomfortable and where I felt scared. And it's like even walking around in London at night, you're always, looking behind your shoulder. So it's definitely, it's a lot more scary. And that's, again, what we exist to do, give those women a voice and hold those in power to account.
I mean, London now, I think going out at night for any female, I don't think I'd ever recommend. I just think
Mm.
it's like, at least I think previously there'd be some nicer parts of it. I don't think there's anywhere in London now where it's generally like a safe place to, and it's really a shame because I think it's killing nightlife for a lot of young people because you don't want to stay out. Do you see that impact amongst your peers, your friends, amongst the women's group, that it's almost deterring them from nightlife and stuff like that?
Oh, 100%, yeah, and especially in London as well. I remember one night I was coming back from a Talk TV appearance, and I was with one of the other guests that I was on as a co-host, and we saw a man walking around central London on the road with a massive knife. Just walking around, and then we saw further down the road another fight kicking off. So you do feel a lot more on edge, especially in London specifically. And I think for women as well, like nightclubs, for example, I think it's getting a lot more dangerous. You've seen women, for example, getting spiked. I remember seeing on the news a little while back about needles as well. Women, being, discreetly, they'd like put a needle in you and like trying to drug them, things like that. So I think for women, you do feel a lot more on edge, you looking out for each other. But yeah, it's definitely changed the nightlife scene and it makes you a lot more on edge.
How much of that can we blame to mass migration? How much of this culture that's been happening, how much do you think you can blame, and how much should we blame mass migration?
Well, I think as we said a little bit earlier on, I think when you're importing a culture on a high scale that does not respect women and more of them are coming to this country, you are going to see these crimes increase. And I think that is on the government as well. I think with the Labour government as well, I think well, I say starting to see the problem. I think Keir Starmer hasn't had a choice but to acknowledge how big of a problem this is getting, which is why he's now all of a sudden being very outspoken on immigration. I would like to see if there's any action behind those words. But I think even for the current government in power, you can't hide away from this problem. And people are crying out for the government to do something because it's just getting completely out of control.
Definitely, and I think it's like it's regardless of left or right. I think it's
Mhm.
like a universal thing now, and that was going to be my next question in terms of your group. Are you seeing people from different political spectrums part of your group, or is it more certain profiles, or are you just seeing quite a wide range of people, whether it's following, subscribing, being part of the group?
So we're non-party political. We focus on this very specific issue, which has meant we've actually seen support from both sides as well. Women who are worried about the scale of mass immigration into this country and look to us to represent them. Even women coming forward, sharing their own stories, and giving them that platform to be able to do so. So we do in the future as well. We want to work cross party, hopefully speaking to politicians and those in power, for example, helping give support to victims, seeing what policies could we help inform on or bring forward to help protect women. So what we want to do, work with those in power, work with politicians from across the political spectrum to help support women.
Amazing. It seems like it's an amazing group. I think it'd be really interesting to see how your group develops and how much attention it hopefully gets more and more. Talking of like what's going on now, I've seen you posting quite a bit about Lucy Connolly. Rightly so, you've been really annoyed at what her current legal status is. Do you see that as a clear sign of almost two-tier policing in the UK, where somebody is in prison right now for a tweet that they sent, a social media post even, and then somebody who actually then removed it shortly after, but she's still in prison right now?
Absolutely, that is a clear example of two-tier policing. Now, bear in mind with this tweet, I think no one is denying that it was an offensive tweet and she shouldn't have posted it. But she deleted that tweet within 3.5 hours after she went for a walk with her dog, reflected on it, and decided to take it down because she realized it was offensive. And then now I think the way that she has been persecuted, the fact she's now going to be, she's now seeing a 2 year, 7 month sentence, I just think is completely ridiculous. For example, Mike Hammersbury, who's a former elected MP, he physically assaulted one of his own constituents on the street with members of the public, having to intervene to stop him. And he will not spend a single day in jail for what he's done. And that's actual physical violence. And yet, Lucy Connolly posts this offensive tweet and then deletes it within 3.5 hours. And now she will be away from her husband, away from their young daughter, in jail. She does not pose a risk to anyone. I think personally she should be freed. And
Yeah.
at the time as well, when she was going through this process, she was advised by a solicitor that if she pled guilty, that she'd be out by Christmas. Well, it's now May and she's still in prison. So I think the whole situation is terrible. And she's being unfairly persecuted.
Does what happened to Lucy worry you with your organization? Because you're talking about stuff that's obviously saying in a complete different tone to what Lucy said, but you're saying some stuff that some people may try and attack and use racial slurs, whatever. Do you worry something like that could happen to your group?
Well, I think for what we try to do, we stick to the facts and our core messaging. We want to work cross party. We want to work with authorities to help ensure that we can help women. I mean, I can't speak for what will happen in the future. I think what we are seeing, though, is an increasing problem where we're seeing. Well, for example, I believe I read an article where violent offenders will potentially be released early, and yet you've got people in jail for things that they've tweeted, which it blows my mind, honestly. Where, well, so we're going to release violent offenders, but keep Lucy, who's got no previous criminal record, locked away because of a tweet that she deleted. So it does worry me about the direction in which this country is going, where we're potentially policing posts more than violent offences. So it will be interesting to see what happens in the future. But yeah, it definitely is a worry. It is a worry. It's a concern.
It's great that you guys are having the courage to have these conversations because it seems like there is definitely an appetite for it, and I think people are probably
Mhm.
a lot of them are scared to have these conversations. So it's great that you guys have the bravery to do it. What are some of the when we talk about women's safety? What are some of the stuff that some of the stuff is showing that is it like sexual violence? Is that the main thing that we're seeing being harmed from the migrants, or is it something different? Is that the main kind of safety concerns, if you like?
Well, I think for women specifically, it would be both, but like sexual crimes, of course, that would be a concern for women. As I said, with a lot of the women that I've worked with who are involved with the organisation, they all have very similar stories, where they're scared to walk home at night. They're more wary when they're walking around in public, just at risk of this. For example, my friend Jess was saying the other week where she went on a picnic with her other friend, and there was a man who was wolf whistling them and blowing their horn at them just for sitting there in the park and having a picnic. So we're seeing a lot more. So you should just be able to sit down with your friend, enjoy yourself, have a nice conversation. But you're just seeing more and more of these problems increase. So I think, yeah, for women, it's definitely a rising concern.
And I think it's something that a lot of people probably ignored in terms of how much of an impact that has, especially something as like
Mhm.
simple as a picnic and that. Do you think so? We saw Sir Keir Starmer give that statement about for the first time acknowledging that there is a negative impact of mass migration. How much truth do you think there is behind that from him? And do you think Labour will do anything? Because for a lot of people, when I first saw it, my first reaction was he's just saying this because of the Reform election 2 weeks ago when Reform absolutely, won so many votes in the local elections. To me, it just seemed like a reaction to that. Or do you think he's actually sat there and thought, okay, maybe this is actually something I kind of have to do?
Well, I think what the Labour Party have now been forced to recognise is that this is becoming an increasing problem, and it's not a party political issue. These are the facts, and people are crying out for the government to do something. And I think in terms of Keir Starmer, he was forced to face the facts and actually address this directly. He couldn't hide behind it anymore. I would be interested to see if he will actually do anything. Behind, I know he's been tweeting some powerful, well, I don't know if you call powerful sentiments online, but I think I think people just want some action. They want him to actually do something about this because it's becoming an increasing problem. I think in terms of reform, they've been very good at addressing the issue. And I think the way, especially I think their social media strategy, the way that they've gotten voters on board, I think it's completely transformed our political system. And I think the fact that reform is growing in voters, in support, especially the last round of elections as well, where they've now got more people in positions of power. I think it just speaks for itself that people are crying out for change. They actually want something to be done. So I think Keir, he was forced to face the facts and actually speak up on it. But whether that will actually follow through with action, we'll have to wait and see.
Talking of like reform, I've met you so many times at Conservative Party conference. You've always been somebody on the more on the right side. I want to first, because I was listening to your episode with Andrew Gold a couple of days ago in preparation for this, and I was fascinated to learn about your like conservatism journey. It was really interesting. So it'd be good for listeners to basically here what made you a conservative, and then we can go into reform and conservative today. But what made you into a conservative in the first place? Because like I said, we're both reasonably young, and I think you've been doing it for quite some time. You've been part of the party, so it's not that common for somebody to be so young, conservative, a woman, and be very vocal about it. What is that journey been like?
So for me, I think when I joined the Conservative Party, I was younger, and I think I was about 18 or so when I first joined. And I think for me, it was because I was starting to get interested into politics, and I felt that my values fell more within that side of politics. However, very quickly, I felt very disillusioned by the party, particularly in how the COVID lockdowns was handled, the coming in and out, the way that the public were lied and deceived throughout all of that. And I think for me, I just couldn't continue to support them after all of that. I felt like that I couldn't trust the prime minister, I couldn't trust the party. I think the fact as well, they were actively breaking the rules that they expected everyone else to follow. I just think I couldn't go behind them and support them. I was a supporter of reform for a small amount of time, but after their treatment of Rupert Lowe, I just felt very disillusioned by that. I think the fact is, what Rupert Lowe was the main reason that I actually joined Reform, because how passionate he was about his constituency, the work that he was doing, and everything he was saying was just hitting the nail on the head. And I think the treatment of Rupert Lowe by the Reform Party has been absolutely shambolic. I think as well the fact that he was trying to speak with the leadership and raise valid concerns about the future of the party, and he felt was being continuously ignored. They wouldn't meet with him. He then raised a couple of concerns and how the party could improve. So when we're coming to a next general election, that they are in the best possible position to be in charge of the country. Then very conveniently, Yusuf reports him to the police over verbal threats that were made 3 months prior. So why did you, if that was such a concern to you, why did you wait 3 months to report that to the police? And then, of course, that was dropped. But I think the way that he has been treated by the party was absolutely shambolic. And I think in some ways it did seem to me like he flew too close to the sun. He was raising valid concerns and they couldn't deal with it. They couldn't deal with his popularity. So I would be very interested to see what Rupert is going to do in the future, and whatever he does, I will completely support him. And it was a shame how Reform treated him, because he was a fantastic MP with them and doing really good work.
I think it's really tough for like yourself, me, for a lot of us who are naturally conservative right now. Not I don't know if politically homeless is the right word, but like we're conservative-minded people. We want to support a really good conservative movement, but it's really hard at the moment to get attached to anything. We've had Ben Habib on here recently, and we were talking about, another one who got treated very poorly by a reform, somebody who's there from pretty much the start and now has been turfed out. I was saying to him, it's really, this is the time where me and you, we should be very clear on who we're supporting right now. This is the opportunity where there's, a clear socialistic almost leader in power right now. They're doing really bad, and we should the pair of us should be very clear on which party we're supporting, very clear in terms of what the next future looks like, because there's such a great opportunity, but it seems really hard to get behind anyone. Do you feel similar?
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. I feel very politically homeless right now. I think before the way Rupert Lowe was treated came to light, I felt like finally with the Reform Party, that was somewhere where I could belong, where I could fully support them, until all of this came out and I felt back to square one again. Because I think with the Conservative Party, I think with the last election, they needed to lose. They had 14 years in power, and I think they lost their sense of identity of who they actually were as a party. And I think they needed to lose to go in the backbenches and actually redefine themselves and get back on track. So I think that was a good thing for them. But then when Reform came to light, I thought, they were very powerful movement. I think, to be fair, that is undeniable as it is. The power, the support they've collected has been huge. But then when you saw again how Rupert Lowe was treated, it just made me really question the integrity of the party. And I would be interested to see what they do in the future. But right now, I feel like there's not a specific party that I can really get behind.
So right now, you're not Reform member, not a Conservative Party member. What do you see the future being? The thing with Rupert Lowe is an interesting one because if
Mm.
you're Kemi Badenoch or the Conservative Party, I think the first thing I would have done in that situation is call up Rupert Lowe and do whatever it takes to get him on the Conservative Party because you can almost stamp down a marker and say, we're new and we're different now, and we value his something. But they just no one's they didn't seem to do that, and what's your take on that? What should Rupert Lowe do now? Like, what should the Conservative Party do? Why have they not taken Rupert Lowe's just there, like for the taking?
Mm. Well, I think whatever he's got planned, well, first up, whatever he does have planned, I will fully support him. I know he released a statement recently after the Met Police dropped the investigation where he was apparently, allegedly, verbally assaulting Zia Yusuf, and that quickly got cleared up. And I believe he said that something is coming very soon, so I think that will come to light. I think we don't know what conversations have been happening behind the scenes or what he's currently planning, but I reckon whatever he is planning to do, I think there'll be a lot of support behind him, whether he joins another party, whether he might even start his own party, which a lot of people have been suggesting him to do. I do wonder as well, would he do something with Ben Habib potentially? Because I think both of them had quite similar experiences. So that would be very interesting. But yeah, again, as I said, I think whatever he's got planned will be very big and lots of people will be behind him.
I think from the election, he's probably been the best MP from the last election that's come in. For me, he's been by far the best MP. The new MP that I've really related to, really enjoyed. He's been by far the best, and Ben Habib kind of alluded to the fact that he almost became too popular too quickly in the Reform
Mm.
ranks. Played his downfall there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what happened to Rupert Lowe. I think he was growing in popularity very quickly. And I know before I'd initially joined the Reform Party, it was him that inspired me to join because I just really loved how passionate he was about his community and the work that he does as an MP. Because I think with a lot of the MPs, what I've seen, they act quite robotic. They'll just side with whatever the party says, which I appreciate that is their job. But I think what I particularly liked about him is you could tell he was very passionate about what he does. He's very passionate about his community, his constituency. He donates his entire salary to charity to help, to help him improve his constituency and help those charitable efforts, which I think is incredibly admirable. You don't see many MPs doing that. So I was very inspired by the work he was doing, and I think he's a very good example of what other MPs should be doing.
Definitely, and it's just like I said. I think it's just sad and frustrating that the right side of UK politics is so split and divided because it seems like everyone's crying out for it now, and there is a real appetite for the right to be really united and together. But it just seems really chaotic at the moment, both with Reform,
Mm.
and they've got such good momentum right now. This should be their time. This should be them really just like taking advantage, taking control, but it doesn't quite seem to be the case. When you're talking, going back to your group and mass migration and all of that sort of stuff, a lot of people will say, and rightly say, the Conservative government did a little to nothing against tackling that. They did a very poor job in terms of mass migration. Do you think that this is something that can be easily solved, regardless, if let's say Reform came into power tomorrow? Do you think that they could be able to solve this, or do you think it's a much deeper issue? For example, civil servants, and we need to go like further in, and we need almost like an Elon Musk style approach, where we remove a lot of the people to actually get decisions done. Because, or do you think it just needs a political change, and that will maybe make the sweep?
I think you need the right party in power who genuinely believe that mass immigration is a big problem in this country and will act and will actually do something about it. Because I think what we've seen with a lot of these politicians, they're pandering, they, say a lot of things, make a lot of promises, but that isn't actually backed by action. I think with the Conservative Party, they had their chance to do that and they failed. And I think with Labour, they've now been forced to recognise the sheer problem that we have with the scale of mass immigration in this country, which is why they've been forced to address it, and that's why you're seeing Keir Starmer now, talking about it quite a lot. But that needs to be accompanied with action. I would like to think if reform do get into power, I would like to think that they would address this properly. We will have to see. I think for many people on both sides of the political spectrum, they just want action. Words aren't enough anymore.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. I think it's frustrating because I think so many people will be thinking this and saying this now, and it's quite clear that we know that there is a serious impact. We had somebody on this show, Edward Dowd, who's a US economist, and he's created a model where he shows the impact of illegal immigration and an economy. So he's done it in America, and he's saying it's a problem in Europe. It's the same thing where he was showing how detrimental illegal immigration is to an overall economy, and it's like you're here talking about the impact of mass migration on women's rights. There are so many issues linked with mass migration. It's not purely just cultural or whatever. There are literally so many different layers linked to it that we can really attribute not every problem, but so many problems. And that's why I find it fascinating with your group as one. What are some of the other issues you're seeing with mass migration? We're talking about what are some of the other, we're talking about women's rights. We've had economy. What are there other stuff that you're seeing with mass immigration that is really impacting your opinion, the UK?
Well, for a start, I think it's putting pressure on our services as well. And for example, so for many young people like myself, I think a big issue is getting on the housing ladder, trying to even getting jobs. For example, like there's a lot of young people, they're coming out of university, they're not even able to get a graduate job anymore. They're so competitive now, and there's a lot of young people that now have to move home for quite a long time because they're just not able to get onto that housing ladder. Or if they're renting, a large portion of their salary is going towards paying a landlord. So it makes it almost impossible to save. And I think as well, as I said, the pressure on local services, I think it's just gotten to a point where it's completely overwhelming and they cannot cope, especially like NHS waiting times, for example. Obviously, that was also impacted by COVID, but I think the fact that we're seeing such a high scale of immigration in this country, it affects all areas of the UK, which I think is why a lot of people now they're saying, well, enough is enough. Something needs to happen because it's just getting to a point where we can't control it. I also saw not too long ago where Patrick Christie's, he went to Calais, or to one of the camps, and he actually
Oh,
interviewed some at the camps where they were planning to come to the UK, and he actually asked them, why do you want to come to the UK? And I remember seeing one of the interviews where he'd asked him this question directly, and he said, give me money, give me anything I need, give me. It's just all give me, give me, give me. So I think for them, they've been told that the UK is this incredible country where they just give you benefits, which I think to be said is true. I don't blame them. Of course, if you're getting free things handed to you on a plate, of course you're going to want to come over. But I think when we're struggling to fund our own services, when we've got our own people who are struggling to pay bills, to get on the housing ladder, but then people coming from different countries illegally just get it handed to them on a plate for free. I don't think that's fair, and I think that's why people be very angry about that.
when did you first like? When did this become a real big issue for you, Anna? Like, when was the not I want to say breaking point, but when did you really start to think like mass migration is actually impacting a lot more a lot more than I realized? What was like the turning point for you?
Well, I think for a start, it's just the way the Conservative Party they promised, as a former member, the fact that they kept promising over and over how they were going to deal with it, and they just kept breaking that promise, and the fact they had all this time and power to deal with it, and they did not. And I'm politically engaged. I'm involved in the sphere. I see this firsthand for myself how it affects all areas of life. And I think, especially over the last few years, the problem is getting more and more apparent, even to those who aren't necessarily politically engaged. It's come to a scale where it's completely out of control, and the government needs to do something.
I just I can't understand why the Conservative government didn't do enough combating it.
Mm.
I don't understand how. I think they just presumed. I know there's a lot of the argument that they do it for the economy because the more people that keep coming in pushes GDP up, but per capita, the average person's life is definitely getting worse. So it makes no sense to me why they've had no control over it. I have no hope in Labour really controlling the numbers. Have you noticed a change amongst your peers, amongst people? Because that's the argument, right? A lot of people would say, well, a lot of young people generally are a lot more liberal to this. They're a lot more open to it. Do, are you seeing a change now amongst like your peers, amongst your friends, where there is a shift, or not really?
Well, I know for me personally, when I've spoken about these issues, I've had private messages from people where they've said, "Oh, I would never be brave enough to say this, but thank you for speaking up on my behalf." So I think there's a lot more people who are quietly starting to see the issue, and or would be supportive of the fact that we need to have less immigration in this country. They can see the impact that it's having on this country and on people. I think for you've got a lot of young people, they use platforms such as TikTok, which from when I've used it, from what I've seen, does lean very left. I've seen
Yeah.
from the other side where they calling Keir Starmer racist even just for talking about this issue, which I think the facts speak for themselves, and it's not racist to say that immigration has gotten out of control in this country, need to do something. And I think for a lot of that young people like myself, I think people are starting to see the scale of the issue, but maybe talking about it with their peer groups, they might be a bit more nervous in case they're called racist, even though it's not racist to point out a problem. The fact that it is getting out of control, the facts speak for themselves. So yeah, I think it honestly depends on like the peer groups who you surround yourself with. But I think for a lot of young people like myself, they are starting to see the issue and the fact it's getting out of control.
I think it's really hard, like when you're just as a white person, because the first thing anyone says is just racist, and I think it's such
Mm,
a stupid argument, but I think it's definitely harder for yourself to speak about as per se to me,
mm,
because then they can't obviously say it to me. So it's a really stupid argument in terms of the racist argument.
mm.
I'm sure, unfortunately, your group's probably going to get, if it hasn't already, some of that racial, people saying that kind of stuff towards it. But like you say, the facts speak for itself. If they can argue back with facts and do it with facts, not with like slurs or whatever, they can argue back in facts, and they do speak for themselves. So yeah, I think it's interesting that
Mhm.
you're seeing young people who are starting to become more aware. I suppose, like as you mentioned earlier, when you can't afford to buy a house, when you see the strain on resources, then naturally you're going to start to your opinion will probably change from what it is when it's at university. So I'm guessing that's probably had an impact.
Yeah, 100%. And I think for university students coming out of uni now, it is getting even more, it's getting so much harder. And I think that problem is just going to increase. I think when you come out of university, you're saddled with so much student debt. And again, as I was saying, I remember seeing a video the other day where I think for one job advert, there'll be like 120 to 140 people applying for that one early grad job. So it's just getting even more competitive. And that's on average, by the way, from one of the videos that I saw. And I think it's just getting so much harder for young people to get their foot in the door and starting their careers. And I think this is one of the this is one of the reasons as to why, because there's such a strain on public resources that for young people trying to start their early careers and their adult life, that is just getting that much harder. Everything's getting a lot more expensive.
Were you affected by COVID at university? Did that
This was,
affect you at
yeah.
all? Oh wow!
Yeah,
When did it affect? If it was like second year, first year, third year?
so it was my first year, so September 2020 when I started university, and it was fully locked down. So my course went completely online. All of my exams were cancelled, and we did have to sit an exam for that entire course. And my A levels as well. All the exams were cancelled. So I remember on the time it was on the basis of it was an algorithm that the government designed where I think you had your predicted grades from your teacher, and then they'd rank you from top to bottom of the class, and then the government had an algorithm to sort of design what grade that you would get had you, even though you had sat the exam. But then once the first set of results came out, that was absolute chaos, because people who should have maybe got A's or A stars were suddenly getting B's and C's. Like one of my friends that I know, her grades were ridiculously low when the first set of results came out, and not at all what she would have got had she had the opportunity to sit the exam. And then the government realised how much it had messed up the students' grades, and then they then went to teacher predicted grades instead. But then for many of those students who got the first set of grades, they actually missed out on their university places, because then they accepted other students who did meet the grades. So had they had the opportunity to sit the exams, they would have got those the grades they should have got, but they got a lot lower grades because of the government. Does that make sense? So
Yeah,
there's a bit,
that is. So
it
like
just
that.
shows
So
how complicated it was at the time during COVID.
that is crazy. And then like we're just talking about the grading system, but like I was
Yeah.
more like wanted to talk about like the impact it had in terms of like I didn't even think of the grading stuff, but like what about like university? What was that like first year? Because that's like normally the most social year, it's a year of meeting people, but I'm guessing that probably wasn't the case.
No, it wasn't. No, I didn't meet anyone because it was all online and all over Zoom. But the lecturers as well, they were struggling to use the Zoom classes. So it was very broken during that time. And again, as I said, all of our exams were cancelled. So I really felt like I wasn't getting much of an education, and yet we were still paying the same amount for Zoom classes, even though such a disjointed education. And then even onto my second year, the first half of my degree was impacted by COVID. It was still partially online, but then it did start to move in person. But then by then, you're sort of I was more getting to the end of my course by then. So I do feel like I was robbed of a university experience. The fact it was all online, didn't get to meet anyone. I know a lot of students in my position felt the same.
Definitely, there's you 100% were robbed of the normal university experience, and I think
Mm.
it's such a terrible thing, and I think it's worse even now for the bit after university where you're graduating and the getting jobs and going into the office and all that stuff. You're missing like the such a important part of like going from a girl to a woman, man, a boy to a man. Like you're missing that whole experience, and I can't imagine how. I mean, how bad that must have felt. And I suppose it would have felt worse because you're in your first year, so you probably would know people year above and year above. So they would have had at least some of the experience, whereas you and your other people wouldn't have. So it would have been really a strange time. I can't imagine what was it like? Would we just literally just all in your own dorms, like just not like what was the experience?
Well, I didn't move on to site because what was the point? It was all
What was it? Yeah,
I know her as well. Like some of the people that I know who did decide to move on campus, there were police patrolling the halls to make sure that people were social distancing and in their room. So there were people actually just being locked up in their room, having to do their course online. So I opted to not move on to university campus because I didn't want to be isolated like that.
yeah, fair
And
enough.
yeah, I think had I known what I was getting myself into, if I'd known it was going to be so locked down, so isolated, I might have not gone to university at all, or I might have gone at a later date, because I don't feel like, even in my first year, I really don't feel like I learnt that much, just because it was all delivered very disjointly over Zoom. I appreciate for the lecturers, they were all having to learn as well how to navigate the situation, and it wasn't their fault. But yeah, I felt like for me, we'd certainly been robbed of a proper university education.
Do you think that has had an impact on you even now, or especially post uni? Do you think that's had an impact, those COVID years? Do you still see that impact on you now?
I think having so with the COVID years, I think that's what made me again feel so disillusioned with the government. For a start, how they handled the A level grading, how how disjointed my university experience was as well. and the rules that we were being put under, and yet they couldn't follow themselves. Yeah, I think for me, it just felt it was really an awful time, and I think for many people as well, they would agree. So yeah.
It's crazy because it's only what we're 2025, so it wasn't like a that long ago. And I think one things I don't like, I feel annoyed even with the Conservative government, Labour government, none of them have really taken accountability. I wish they just put their hands up and said, we made some serious mistakes, and like we went too far, we made too many measures, and we're actually going to seriously learn from this. But it just seems like, I don't know how you feel, but it feels like no one has taken any accountability for so much of the wrongdoings of those COVID years.
I completely agree, and it felt like as well when they were called out for it, they wouldn't take any accountability. There was just always one excuse or another, when really it was their responsibility. And I think as well, just coming in and out of lockdown, how much the public were lied to. They couldn't even follow their own rules. It just, to me, it felt so despicable, and it made me completely lose faith in the government. And I think for a lot of people, it was a really awful and a really scary time as well. You're away from loved ones, away from family members, friends for such a long time, and yet they felt like the government, it didn't, the rules that they imposed didn't apply to them, which to me felt incredibly unfair.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, it's been amazing talking to you, Anna. We could keep talking for a while, but it's been amazing to speak to you, and I definitely support the Women's Safety Initiative. We'll put the details and the links to the bio of this podcast. I have like a closing thing that I always do with the guests, which is I ask them, what is an unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be popular? So it can be something we discussed, it can be completely trivial. It's like entirely up to you. But yeah, an unpopular opinion you have that you think should be popular.
An unpopular opinion I have. Well, I think a lot of the discussion that we've been having tonight is about the scale of immigration. I think as a young girl myself involved in politics, that would be a very unpopular opinion for me to say that immigration has gone out of control in this country. But it's true, and I stand by it.
Awesome. I think a lot of people, maybe not young people, I think a lot of people would agree with you. But yeah, that's a great opinion. Thank you today, Anna.
Thank you.